Hello, everybody. We're going to do Chapter 7, Part 1. This is 3 out of the 4 lectures for archaeology. This chapter, now that you know kind of what archaeology is, we're going to be talking about kind of like the research side of it. All right. As I've been mentioning throughout the rest of the lectures, please be sure to read and watch our materials. Please make sure to complete this week's quiz and reflection. And please do the reflection with these tips. Make sure to only use information from the class and make sure it is 600 words. Okay. All right. So one thing that's the thing about question one for you today is after understanding a little about our past, what were some key factors in humans being able to live as they do today? Okay. So basically, you think about today's society, and you heard a little bit about bands, tribes, chieftains in the states. What things allow us to do that, right? And we're obviously going to go over them in the lecture. All right, so let's talk about the environment real quick. So until about 10,000 years ago, humans and their hominid ancestors were all gathered hunters living in bands. So about 10,000 years ago, we were all kind of like in smaller groups hunting and gathering, okay? And then glaciers retreated and Earth's changing climate created new ecological settings, okay? So the reason why this statement is so vague is because we don't know actually like exactly what motivated the humans to become as whatever like as they are today. The running theory is that the glaciers retreated and the Earth's climate became more friendly for smaller animals such as humans, and we were able to hunt other small animals, eat more, develop more, so on and so forth. And a lot of the predators for humans were also went extinct. Okay, but who knows, right? So this is all just speculation, but that's generally the kind of theory behind it. All right. Now, before we get into this, I want to talk about something that's very important. Okay, human imagination. It's one of the things that separates us from other animals and other organisms. Okay, so human imagination, when we talk about dependence on culture, helps humans survive, but it's also a source of freedom. Culture traditions arise out of the imagination and cultural experimentation with the material world. Traditions can become entrenched and affect future actions, right? So basically, human imagination, when we talk about it later, it's actually kind of like the same thing as human culture, right? Which we're going to learn about in the next section. But human imagination is really important, is because it's what really separates us from other animals, right? So and you'll see later, the way that human imagine plays in our lives is that we could be under the same set of circumstances, but we would act differently, right? Because of human imagination. So the points here, right? The first point, right? Culture helps us humans survive, but it's also a source of freedom, right? So culture may, it might help us survive, but it's also just a source of our individuality, right? So, for example, there's a lot of cultural norm. For example, you're not supposed to have sex before you're married. Does that mean everyone doesn't have sex before you're married in that culture? Of course not, right? It changes the way we behave, but we don't always follow it to a T. So that's very important. Okay, culture doesn't tell us what to do; it provides like a framework, right? Culture traditions arise of imagination and culture expanded with the material world. That's just a fun fact, but basically, what we go through kind of shapes what cultural understandings we have. And again, what's very important to understand is that they're not the same, right? They can be different all throughout. Okay, and finally, traditions can become entrenched and affect future actions. This is very important. So traditions and culture can affect your future. And you might be asking, how does that work? Well, like let's use the example I had before. You're not supposed to have married before you have. I mean, so you're not supposed to have sex before you're married. Let's say you do, right? Now, how you act in that situation is going to be very much based off of the cultural standard of you're not supposed to have sex before you're married. So, for example, you might have sex and feel ashamed about it. You have sex and try to keep it a secret. You might wait a certain amount of time before you have sex, whatever, right? It changes your behavior. But also on the flip side of that, all you need to think about is how would I react if it was encouraged to have sex before marriage, right? It would be the opposite. You'd probably be bragging about it. You'd probably be not afraid to talk about it with maybe your parents or something, right? This is how culture can affect our future actions. Okay. Now, when we talk about culture, we'll go deeper into that later on. But Let's do this last point. So humans can have similar life ways in different environments or different life ways in similar environments. So what this is trying to say is, again, our environment doesn't tell us what to do. It might guide us, but doesn't tell us what to do. So, for example, humans might have similar life ways in different environments. So um, let's say that let's say that this tribe lives near water and this other tribe does not live as close to water as the other tribe, right? The crowd live near water. People might assume that they eat fish, but in reality, they don't eat fish that much. They like to hunt deer, and so does the other tribe that lives like in the desert, right, or something. Okay. The main point is that they're using similar life ways despite being in different environments. But the same could also be true in the opposite form, right? Um, just because they're in different environments doesn't mean that they're going to have different life ways. Okay. So even though let's say a tribe has both of these people live near water, right? Just because they both live near water doesn't mean they're going to have the same ways of fishing. Doesn't mean they're going to have the same ways of keeping their houses from getting flooded, right? It all depends on the individuals in the community and the actual society. Okay, so again, why is that important? The reason why it's important is because again, human imagination makes it so that we're all different. If you were to only, well, we'll talk about it later. So just keep that in mind. Human imagination makes it so that we're all different. Okay, so let's talk about niche construction. Niche construction is a biological concept. Niche construction happens when an organism actively changes its environment or a new environment. An easy example for niche construction is a beaver, right? Or no, not even a beaver, a bird, right? A bird has to build a nest, right? You're modifying the physical environment. A beaver has to build a dam, modifying the physical environment. An ant creates an ant hill, whatever, right? These are examples of niche construction. Domestication of plants and animals is a human form of niche construction, right? So because humans are modifying their physical environment, domestication is a form of niche construction. Now, if you're not listening to this lecture, this question on the flag is going to be kind of difficult for you, but the definition of domestication is right here. It's when the reproduction of a local species is interfered with by human action. That is very important. If you use the word tamed, I know for a fact you didn't watch this lecture. So the reason why it's important is because you can tame a lot of animals, but it doesn't mean you have control of the reproduction, right? And so when it comes to reproduction, for example, with cows, right, we purposely breed them in certain seasons so that they have babies in certain seasons, so it makes it easier for them to take care of them, right? We purposely breed dogs so that they look cute or they look extra mean or whatever, right? But the main point is we're controlling the reproduction. But what people don't often talk about when domestication is also plants, right? So for example, when we grow, I don't know, strawberries or rice or whatever, we plant them in a line or we plant them in a way where they all sprout at the same time or where it's convenient for us to harvest them. Okay, that is domestication. So once we have control of the reproduction, that is domestication. Okay. All right. So human change with plant domestication. So sedentism is the most important contribution from domestication, or something important, the most consistent contribution from domestication. Okay, sedentism is basically when you settle in one place. So before domestication, we will be running around hunting and gathering. For domestication, because you're I don't know, like taking care of animals, because you're trying to grow like plants and stuff, you stay still. Okay, and that is the most consistent contribution to our society. Now, if you look on Wikipedia, it's going to say the biggest contribution to domestication is basically more food, which they are not wrong. However, you have to understand at that time when our societies were developing, I don't know about you, but if you were to start farming, would you know a lot? No, right? Even if you Googled stuff, it would still take you a while. So imagine back then when they had no knowledge of how things grew, how long it would take to grow a reasonable amount of food. That being said, they still were trying. So they were settling one place, but they were still hunting and gathering. So they could have been, basically what I'm saying is, no matter what society you were, sometimes the food contribution from the attempted domestication of plants and stuff did not yield a lot of food, right? And so they still relied heavily on hunting and gathering. So in that way, the amount of food isn't as important as it forced us to stay still. Okay, no matter how successful or how much of a failure your domestication is, you have to stay still. And you think about our society today. Our society today is very much built off of staying still. Okay, for example, you look for a job in the city that you're living in, or even in the district, right? Pretty easy. In the city, easy, but not as easy. In the state, easy, but not as easy, right? When you, let's say you want to move, right? Okay, great. Let's say you move out of state. Oh, okay. When you move out of state, that's when your licenses and your education, all these things start having different applications. Okay, still not too bad though. You got to get a new driver's license, so on and so forth. Now let's try moving to another country. How difficult is that? Extremely difficult, right? So if you look at how our society is built, it's actually built very much on us staying still. So domestication, the biggest, or so the most consistent contribution that domestication had for human societies is that it forced us to stay still. It forced us to be sedentary. Okay. Now, animal domestication. Domestication of animals is challenging to see archaeologically, but can be indicated by animals outside the natural range, physical changes in animal shape and size, abrupt increase in animal numbers in one location, increased numbers of males killed for meat. Okay, so animals outside their natural range. So let's say chickens are found in Queens. If you find chickens, in like, I don't know, Virginia, right, and you dig them up, you find them, like, oh shoot, that means that they were domesticated because they were brought over there, right? Physical changes in animal shape and size. If you look at the bone structure of a dog today and the bone structure of a dog like 1,000 years ago, it'd be different, right? So those physical changes are noticeable. That is evidence that there was domestication. Abrupt increase in animal numbers in one location. So for example, right? Like think about a farm. How many like cow bones would be there if it just got wiped out right now? A lot, right? So if you see all those bones from the same animal, it's a pretty clear indicator that it's, that's been domesticated. And finally, increased numbers of males killed for meat. This is probably the most difficult to see through bones and stuff, but sometimes you can, like where you see a bunch of bones that match the male side of the species, but again, very difficult. Okay, so these are the 4 ways you can tell whether an animal is domesticated. That being said, it is very difficult, so keep that in mind. All right, animal domestication stages. Animal domestication may have followed 6 stages: random hunting, controlled hunting, herd following, loose herding, close herding, and factory farming. Random hunting, exactly what it sounds like. Hey, there's a deer, let's go kill it, right? Kill him. Controlled hunting is just a more selective process. Like, oh, hey, you know what? That deer does not look that big. I'm gonna let it grow up before I kill it, but that deer does. Let's kill the deer that looks bigger, right? It's like you're hunting, but randomly, but not as random, if that makes sense. Herd following, exactly what it sounds like. You're following the herd, right? It's a better way of getting food because it's more consistent, and you'll always have some food, right? Loose herding. So now at this point, we're starting to interfere a little bit with the reproduction, but not a lot, right? So for example, oh, we're following the deer herd. Let's say, oh, that deer looks sick. We should separate it from we should kill it and separate it from the group so they don't get the other deer sick. That's loose herding. Close herding. Close herding is kind of what you would imagine as an organic farm, right? Where you have a farm, right? You have like chickens doing stuff, and you taking care of the chickens, maybe you taking care of the plants, whatever. And finally, factory farming is what we're actually doing today. So most of the advertisements, they make it look like close herding, but in reality, it's factory farming. And actually, we're going to watch a documentary later on in the semester that's going to talk a little bit about that. Okay? Very good. So thinking about domestication. Scholars once viewed all original case domestication as caused by a universal factor. The factor that they have like these basically individual theories as to why domestication came about. The first one is broad spectrum foraging. Oh my goodness. Broad spectrum foraging is one theory that views domestication as directly related to climate change. The end of the ice age enabled more secure hunting, fishing, and gathering. Populations grew and became sedentary, and stress on resources led some to domesticate wild plants and animals. That's pretty straightforward, right? End of the ice age, which is when the glaciers retreating, was basically like, it made it easier to hunt, fish, and gather food. And because of that, we became more numerous, like more of us existed as humans. And then we put more pressure on the resources around us, and so it forced us to stay still. and domesticate plants and animals. That's a pretty good theory. Okay. Another theory is competition between local groups with dominance could have spurred domestication, right? Feasting and competitive exchange might have increased via demands for food. Land use would have increased. Land use would have increased, and development of food production followed. This theory emphasizes social factors. Competitive feasting is obviously difficult to see archaeologically. So basically, with this example, it's just two societies flexing on each other. Be like, yo, you just had a feast, F you, I'm gonna have a feast too. And eventually, you had so many feasts that you're like, shoot, I need some more food. And basically, it's not that much food over here to hunt or gather, so I got to find a different way to get food. Oh wait, let's domesticate food. Okay. Now, why do I bring up these two examples? The reason why I bring up these two examples is because I want to let you know that logic is a man-made social construct, right? And what do I mean by that? I mean that this sounds the most logical, right? Broad spectrum foraging. Hey, the glaciers retreated, the environment is better, we can hunt more things, we ate more food, we became more people, and then because we became more people, we needed more food to eat, and so we started domesticating. That's a very logical, deduction, right? However, this is just as possible, right? This story of us just flexing on each other, and then we flex on each other so much that we run out of food and then we have to grow more, is just as likely as the previous one. And this is what I was talking about with human imagination, right? If you were to say, so a lot of people say like, oh, we did domestication because it had more food. Yeah. Well, do we always make the same choice all the time? No, we don't. Because it has more food. Well, now we have. So if that was the case, that means that all humans would make the same decision, but they didn't, right? Let's think about our lives today. We all know it is unhealthy to drink or to smoke or to stay up late at night or to not eat vegetables, whatever, right? But we still do it, right? We don't always choose the healthier option. And the reason why that's important is because if we did, that means that all of our thinking would be the same. So essentially what I'm saying is that this is evidence of human imagination. So yeah, just keep that in mind. Okay, so just like this broad spectrum foraging and competition between local groups are just as possible in terms of us developing domestication. All right. So example. So this is an example of a what's it called? A complex society that developed without domestication. Okay. So again, I'm providing a couple examples or an example of a society that didn't have to domesticate but was still a complex society. Again, just going to show that we didn't all follow the same route. This just seems to be the route that we think most people followed, right? So anyways, this is the early domestication in Southwest Asia. Recent studies of the 12,500-year-old Natufian culture used a multiple strand approach. Sedentism was possible initially without domestication. Natufians settled in a village of 40 to 150 people. They intensely exploited wild resources in small areas. Sites show evidence of social stratification, a form of social organization in which people have unequal access to wealth, power. Okay, great. So basically, the Natufian people, they settled in one area, they did not domesticate, and they still were a complex society, right? Just to show that it is possible to be a complex society without domestication. All right, so I just put this in here just so we can, just for fun. Domestication in the Americas. Domestication of plants and animals occurred independently in 3 areas of the Americas. Mesoamerica, maize, corn, and squash. Maize and squash. South America, manioc, potatoes, beans, quinoa, and llamas. And finally, Eastern United States, which is over here, goosefoot, marsh elder, sunflowers, and squash. You can actually see most of these in the marine park, the little hike. I think it's called a marine park. I forgot the actual. I think it's called a marine park, like the actual like the water and stuff. Yeah, you can check that out. It's over there. Okay, great. All right, moving on. So, consequence of domestication and sedentism. Domestication and sedentism had drawbacks, but society became too dependent to return to foraging. So this is very important. A lot of people, when they talk about domestication, they talk about it as if it's like a choice. Like, oh, hey, I could have hunted and gathered, or I could have domesticated. I'm going to choose domestication. No. Essentially, if you think about them, you have to understand that these are humans back then, right? Just like us humans today. Why don't we do certain things? A lot of times just because we weren't exposed to it. Did I choose not to farm? No, I just didn't know how to farm. My parents don't know how to farm. People around me don't farm, right? So it's less about, again, us choosing something, but more about us being dependent on something else, right? So anyways, land was no longer freely available, obviously, because people started domesticating, they started staying still, and then territories grew. Populations grew. Diseases were more readily spread. Diseases were more readily spread, you know, because you're staying still. Diseases all around, right? Like, not to be gross, but when you use the bathroom, you only, like, especially back then, you don't have a sewage system. It stays in your society essentially, right? And diseases, and sorry, and also, when you get sick, you're closer to other people, so that happens. Okay. Surplus production and food became possible. So basically, more food than you needed became possible. And finally, social stratification, which again is just social categories, and social complexity increased. Okay. So, full circle. After thinking a little bit about our past, what are some key factors in humans being able to live as they do today? So, I would say, obviously, the two things is domestication and sedentism, right? Those are two of the biggest things. Domestication, because it provided us with food, with animals for us to use for our society. And more importantly, though, its contribution with sedentism, which in order to do domestication, you need to stay still. And if you look at our societies today, there's a lot of differences between our societies, but one of the major consistencies is that we're staying still. All right. All right. So again, please read and watch all material. Please do this week's quiz and reflection. If you have any questions, just shoot me an email at raymond.fong@kbcc.cuny.edu.